So what I'd like to do now is to move to our next slide and pass over the presentation and conversation to two colleagues. We're joined today with Aki from Australia, who's talking to us from Japan, and Nick, who is also in Australia, who's talking to us from Australia as well. And so we'd like to start the presentation now.
Okay, Aki, do you want to just introduce this in the image?
Yes. So this is our first slide, practically first slide, which is showing Tori Senbon Tori, which means 1,000 gates at the Japanese shrine. These gates being donated by people and companies to give thanks to success or pray for the future, and they form path built by many individual contributions. So we have this because this is a simple metaphor for future generational governance. Because each decision we make, today is like adding one gate, and together they create the path that future generations will walk on. So please, next slide.
Thank you. And before we go any further, we'll acknowledge countries. So thank you for joining the webinar. And acknowledging country is a tradition, if you like, or a modern tradition, if nothing else, in Australia, but also I think a quite old tradition for the traditional owners of the land. And so in Australia, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we live and work and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And obviously, that's an Australian tradition, and it may be a tradition in other parts of the world, but in the UK and elsewhere, it's not so much of a tradition. But we did want to highlight, and with that Earthrise picture there, how no matter how far back we go, no matter where we live and work, we're always walking in the footsteps of generations of humans past. And this probably feeds into the whole context of this presentation, both with what Aki talked about in terms of stewardship in the future and obviously us inheriting from the past too. Next slide, please. So that's myself on the left, or the right, I'm not quite sure, but Professor Nick Barter. I'm a professor in strategy and sustainability at Griffith University, which is in Brisbane, Australia. And I'm also a visiting fellow at Lancaster University and the founder of Future Normal. In the middle is our colleague, Professor Jan Bebbington, who welcomed us at the start. She's a professor in accounting and director of the Pentland Centre for Sustainability and Business at Lancaster University in the UK. And then we also heard from Dr. Akihiro Omura, who is a senior lecturer in finance at Griffith University and had previously been an equity analyst at Mitsubishi and SMBCE Nikko. Next slide, please. So why are we looking at generational governance? Well, the pure and simple fact is we're looking at it because of the roots of really mine and Jan, and to a degree Aki's perspective. And it is about that stewardship perspective, and the sustainable development definition typically cited is the Brundtland definition from 1987, which is development which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. A lot gets loaded onto this definition, but really what I want us to be reminded of and focus on is it's about time. We can people often load on all sorts of other concepts and ideas, but at the core, that is about people and time and moving and kind of passing from one generation to the next. And that's really what's driven this whole notion of generational governance, where we have to steward our world, if you like, to a degree, into the next phase. And that kind of maxim there, or that definition, is a guide for how we might think about and do this in organizations. So next slide, please. So One of the challenges you have with thinking about future generations is often people will talk about unborn generations. And we can end up in all sorts of philosophical cul-de-sacs around what do unborn people who don't have a say and aren't around want. And what we've done and what we continually do is take a practical turn. And we say a generation is 30 years. So when we think about meeting the needs of future generations, we actually think about meeting the needs of those. For example, I'm 56 years old, so it's about meeting the needs of those 26 years younger than me. And the average age of a CEO is 57 years old, and the average age of a board member of an organization is 60 years old. And so, what we think about with future generation and understanding who they are in the context of a typical organization is it's a CEO or a board member speaking to somebody who may be between the age of 27 and 30 years old. And the important thing there is that's very practical. It's very likely in a lot of organizations. And the other thing is, it's not about speaking to, again, in as we worked our way through this subject, it's not about speaking to children or anything like that. These are 27 to 30-year-olds of, performing agents in our world, if you like, and not waiting for anything to come along. They're there and part of organizations, likely to be making decisions, could well have management roles, etc., etc. So this practical turn that we're talking about here means that we can suddenly start to action the idea of thinking about what comes next for the next generation or for future generations in a very practical way, as opposed to a kind of philosophical cul-de-sac type way. Next slide, please. And so that then puts us to kind of the last stake in the ground before we talk about the survey is to say, what do we mean by generational governance? Well, in the work we did, we had two ideas that we gave respondents. The first is a main board with greater age diversity. And because the average age of a board member is 60, putting age diversity in there would mean you'd have people between 30 to 60-year-olds on a main board of an organization, something that is the exception, if at all, relative to the norm. And then the other option we offered our respondents was a next generation committee to advise the main board. And that next generation committee would be comprised of individuals around 30 years old. And we didn't want to be specific to 30 years old, but around 30 years old. So those are the two ideas we gave our survey respondents as we explored their perceptions. Next slide, please. Aki, over to you.
Yes. So this is the survey that we have conducted last year. So altogether, we had 3,000 respondents, 1,000 each from each country, Japan, UK, and then Australia. And the average age of this survey respondent was 43 years old. So, they're in the middle age. And the gender diversity is quite well diverse, 55% male, 45% female. And more than 60% of people had a bachelor degree. So, we don't say the qualification matters in terms of how the company is being run or, has ability to run the company. But then we have large number of respondents with the higher degrees. And 100% of our respondents being working full-time. And 30% on board and C-suite. And interestingly, not 100% of the respondents were from the profit generation organization, but it's actually 30% were from not-for-profit organizations. So it actually shows, our responses or results likely to show the general perceptions of those who would likely to take the role in the next generation. Next slide, please. So having conducted the survey, we have conducted quantitative analysis, and we have reached two, broad results or decision. Conclusions. One is according to our respondents' responses, we think that the organizations, they are believed that the organization do consider future generations. But at the same time, we found that they would still benefit from, having over generational governance will benefit further in terms of, organizations to make socially just decisions, and decisions to make to achieve the net zero target. And by the way, the report is available on the public now. And if you're interested, there's a QR code for you to access the reports tables. So please feel free to visit them, and hopefully you can cite our paper report in your future publications. All right, next slide, please. And then the second broad conclusion we have reached is, although organizations see the benefits of generational governance, as I mentioned just then, there is some resistance to implementing generational governance. For example, sharing power or young people, whether they have skills or not. And also, but at the same time, we found that respondents feel that there are many benefits to generational governance. For example, greater ability to attract talent, enhanced long-term value, etc., etc. So these are the our general conclusions. And in the next two slides, we like to show you the actual result, visualized result. First of all, this question asked respondents on what would they think be the possible barriers for implementing generational governance. And as you can see, the respondents, none of the questions had more than 50% of respondents saying yes, they are barriers, right? And also, interestingly, for which ones? Just let me think. Oh yes, the one on the right side. So this is the saying, asking whether the pressure of the role on young people actually are the barriers. But then considering this, more than 70% of people are actually believing that this is not the barrier. And also, second from the right, which is the willingness of current leaders to invest in capability building to ensure generational governance was effective. So only 36% of board or C-suite believed this is the barrier. So what we are seeing is the respondents are believing that the barriers to implement generational governance is not so high. Can you turn to the next slide? And in this question, we asked, what are the benefits of generational governance? And interestingly, a large percentage of C-suite recognizes the benefit of generational governance than non-C-suite respondents, which was a little bit different from the previous question, because previous question had a quite similar results among for both board and C-suite or and non-board C-suite. Okay, and then this difference is seen especially in the case of for attracting talented younger generation. So as C-suites are taking more important role for the company to be, keep going, going concern, this result is very positive for progressing with the generational board from our perspective. Next slide, please.
And this is where I take over the storyline, thanks to my previous two colleagues. And this is really why we produce the report, but also why we're running this webinar, because the survey gives us a glimpse into what's going on among a relatively small but a representative sample of business people. And so what we think we're taking from the survey is that this is a topic area worth investigating more, that organisations don't see massive disadvantages or massive impediments to doing this practice, but also that it will generate successful outcomes in a whole variety of ways. And we don't know how they're related to each other, but again, that's the reason why we're having this wider conversation. And our interest was sort of peaked in this topic area because we know of some organisations in some countries where generational governance approaches, often with young boards, actually exists. So it's not a common practice, and it'll be really interesting to hear from colleagues in the discussion whether or not they've seen it, because we're really sort of taken that there's colleagues here from Taiwan, Japan and Italy. So there may be hidden practice that we don't know about. We know that it's quite a usual practice in the Netherlands. So the Port of Amsterdam, for example, has a youth board that they've had for quite some period of time. And these are younger people who are working within the organisation who have been trained up to be able to have conversations with the main board. So what we would like to do after a conversation with yourselves is we'd like to see if we could get a framework to better understand this practice and to be able to maybe provide more examples of how people undertake this approach. So we're sort of coming to the end of the conversation, but one other thing I'd say here is that we know that family business, if you like, has a natural inclination towards generational governance because it's generations of the same family that are involved in running the business. So we think there's something instructive and interesting that we might be able to understand from family business settings as well. And then here are the prompts for our discussion. And so once we close down the slideshow and stop recording, we'll pop those prompts in the chat as well, so you can still have access to them. But we're really quite interested in hearing, well, what's your experience? Have you heard of this practice? Have you seen how it operates in particular firms? And also, it's not a bolt-on in terms of, you could imagine having a young generation board, but then if nobody actually has the power to say or to do things or aren't trained to, then that might require much more fundamental change in corporate governance in general. And then any insights, questions, observations are really welcome.